4 games to go in the regular season. The Blue Devils head out on the road this week. A little bit different. Stepping out of conference play for a date with the Huskies, trying to break a tie. 2-2 is the all-time series between these two. Of course, the Blue Devils have won the last two. 2 years ago up in East Hartford, 41-7. And last year here in Durham, 26-21. As we welcome inside Blue Devil Tower, I, of course, am David Shumate alongside the 2013 Coastal Division champion and captain Dave Harding. That was the last time the Blue Devils played for an ACC title. That is certainly front and center in the minds of all Duke fans out there right now as the Blue Devils sit at 4-1 in ACC play. But Dave, not a conference game this week, but don't get it twisted, a very good opponent on the road.
Yeah, it still matters for the Blue Devils in their larger pursuit, not just of getting to the ACC championship game, but getting into the college football playoff. What you can do in non-conference, and Duke slipped up a few times earlier in the year, the Illinois game at Tulane, and they've yet to really play great in non-conference this year on the road. Obviously the Tulane game being the one slip up, and this is an opportunity, as we were talking to Manny Diaz earlier in the week, for the Blue Devils to right the ship and come out there and right some wrongs. I think is exactly how he said it. A very good team in UConn. A unique positioning of the non-conference game in the middle of all of this conference madness going on in November. So somewhat unprecedented and unusual vibe to this, but I think the Huskies have Duke's full attention. They've won 6 games already, 3 losses, all 3 losses, David, in overtime. Hard to believe. I don't think I've ever actually seen that. So this is a team that's believing in what they've got going on. They're talented, and I think they feel confident in their matchup, having already beaten an ACC team earlier in the year, losing a close one on the road to Syracuse when they had Steve Angeli, so a little bit more firepower to that group than the one that the Blue Devils saw up in Syracuse, New York. So some I think history that would say the Huskies should be feeling confident, but Duke coming off an excellent win against Clemson. Clemson far more talented than the Huskies are, so Duke should also feel confident.
46-45 was that win in Death Valley. You mentioned Connecticut, the season they're having. They have actually not lost at home. A bunch of different close losses. It's funny to hear you talk about that Tulane game. It does feel like a lifetime ago because the Blue Devils have been so good away from home in ACC play. Those dominant wins at Syracuse and California, and then that thriller over the weekend against Clemson. Only one more road game in ACC play after this one. I think we know where that is, down the street. We'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. But first, let's talk about this matchup between these two. And Dave, when you look at Connecticut statistically, so many numbers, and I'm going to ask you about them, but there's one number that I think defines this team that is not on the board. They've only turned it over 1 time. That's the best mark in the country. They fumbled 3 times. They've only lost it once, and their quarterback, Fignano, who's not listed, 0 interceptions. Hasn't had an interception since last November. So taking care of the football for the Blue Devils is going to be at a premium. They haven't really turned it over. Darian Mensah with only 2 picks on the season, but it's a Blue Devil defense that's been very adept at taking it away. Turnovers could play a big factor, but as you peruse all of these different statistics, what jumps out?
Well, the similarities on offense. We've talked a lot about what the Duke offense is capable of. Darian Mensah has been fantastic. Nate Shepard, Anderson Castle in the ground game, Jeremiah Hazley, numerous weapons and threats. And if you're going to find one offense that can pair up, you'd never necessarily expect it to be UConn, but in fact it is. They've been very efficient offensively. They're pretty well balanced, although they lean a little bit more on the ground in terms of or when compared to the Blue Devils. And I think that's what we're going to see a little bit more of this week, especially since Clemson was able to get their ground game going. I think you'll see UConn trying to run the football, get to the perimeter, put some pressure on this Duke defense, especially running sideline to sideline, put some pressure on the secondary to make tackles. But it's a matchup, at least offensively, when you look at the offenses, that comes to exactly what you alluded to, the turnovers and taking care of the football. I think the team that's able to do that against 2 defenses that are pretty talented, pretty aggressive, bring a lot of blitzes. This number sticks out to me more than anything. 33 sacks on the year for the Huskies. They get after opposing offenses and create havoc. Very difficult to get a beat on where they're going to be bringing pressure. There'll be 3 down defensive linemen, 4 down defensive linemen. You'll have safeties, a deep safety, come all the way up at the snap and bring a blitz. It's hard to predict and to see and to get any kind of trend on where they're bringing pressure from, which is how they've been able to get into the backfield, get sacks, get TFLs. So some pressure on the Duke offense to make sure that they're able to, number one, sort all that out, but then secondly, not let it fluster them to the tune of a turnover.
Yeah, tied for second nationally in those sack numbers. You see Skylar Bell sitting over there. He is one of the best receivers in the country. 994 yards receiving, second nationally, 11 touchdowns receiving. That leads the country. Fignano, Dave was talking about him, 22 touchdowns he's tossed on the season, tied for fourth nationally. We know Darian Mensah has 21, also number 85, getting work done, 56-yarder. In the game against Clemson, tight ends could certainly be a big factor for Manny Diaz's bunch, but to me, the numbers that stand out, you mentioned the rushing offense for Connecticut. The Blue Devils 136, but it's been kind of a different thing since they've gotten Nate Shepard into the fold and Anderson Castle. And that's when Connecticut's been a little bit vulnerable, giving up 175 yards on the game. And the way Connecticut attacks, the way they come after you, they're trying to create negative plays, just like the Blue Devils do defensively. But when they do that, there are opportunities for explosive plays, particularly in the run game. Wouldn't be surprised to see Shepard leak out and go for a long one on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The ground game on both of these teams, where my eyes are going to go, because as we just talked about, UConn, I think they feel like they've got an opportunity. Their offensive line, a little undersized, but quick and can try to out-leverage defensive linemen. They're going to try to run the football. The Blue Devils, I think, also are going to be licking their chops with what they've seen. And some of the aggressiveness, like you talked about, lends itself to gaps that are not protected because you're bringing defenders from all over the place. Sometimes you are not gap sound, and a Nate Shepard and Anderson Castle able to see that, they can make you pay. I also think the Blue Devils, haven't been perfect in the secondary either. UConn has seen and then shown some situations with how exotic they are. They're not always buttoned up in coverage, and players can pop loose down the field in the passing game. We saw that last week, even against Clemson. Darian Mensah, the Duke quarterback, so good at identifying when those situations happen. In fact, the Clemson busted coverage with Cooper Barkate running free down the sideline. He was like the third receiver in the pattern for Mensah to look to, and eventually got down there and realized he was wide open. So Mensah's identification is going to be huge.
And what Connecticut has done this year statistically has been impressive. It's been interesting to watch Jim Moore this week, of course, the longtime NFL head coach, obviously been a head coach in college for a while as well. Kind of feeling like his team isn't getting the respect that they deserve when you look at what they're doing statistically, both on offense and defense. So they're certainly going to be fired up this weekend. Dave mentioned it's an independent Connecticut. They're in the Big East for basketball, but independent for football. They played 2 ACC teams. They lost in overtime at the Dome, and then they obviously beat Boston College a few weeks ago. So one common opponent between the two. And let's get to our players to watch, and I'll go first. I was talking about Skylar Bell and how good he is statistically. It'd be really nice if you have an All-American corner who can follow him over the field. Who knows if that's going to happen, but Dave, Chandler Rivers could be a big part of the story on Saturday.
I think he absolutely will be, because Bell is, without a doubt, their best threat offensively, especially in the passing game. If you're able to lock him up, things get a little bit tougher to move the football. And I think that coverage down the field, forcing Fignano to hold on to the football, allows that defensive front, B.J. Anthony, Wes Williams, especially those defensive ends, to get after them, apply some pressure. They want to take deep shots. That's what UConn wants to do, establish the run and then take some shots down the field. In order to do that, you've got to stand in the pocket. There has to be a pocket. I think the Duke defensive front, paired with really good coverage deep by Chandler Rivers and the other defensive backs, has an opportunity to feast. I'll make a note too. Same 2 players from last week.
We switched. I was on the quarterback last week.
And we win this week. I don't know. We might have to see the same players to watch. But I talked a little bit earlier about Darian Mensah's, his ability to work through his progressions, identify busted coverages down the field. This week, it's about understanding and getting a little bit of a beat on what UConn's bringing from a pressure standpoint. If you can do that, you've got an opportunity to hit some deep shots down the field, to find some openings in zone coverage underneath. If you don't, it could result in turnovers because they'll drop defensive linemen into coverage underneath certain routes coming across the middle, and you can throw the ball away. A lot of it's going to come down to Darian Mensah and his poise in the pocket, his ability to communicate with the offensive line and the running back to sort out what protection looks like, and then ultimately once the ball is snapped, that vision we've seen be so good, and looking down the field and finding open receivers, any number of the plethora that Duke has gone to in the passing game, but a lot of pressure on the Duke signal caller to be really good and sharp in seeing what UConn's trying to do defensively.
So a very intriguing matchup. Obviously, don't forget, Duke has loftier goals than this, but it would be their 6th win if they can get it on Saturday at Connecticut and clinch a berth in the postseason. All right, we're going to wrap up as we do every week. No props this week. I don't have a bag of Halloween candy as we flip to November, but it is the final non-conference game on the year, a road trip. What brings to mind? You've done this both as a player and a broadcaster. Now, you got any favorites over the years of your trips away from home and non-conference play?
That's a good one. Luckily, the ACC has some really good conference places that we can go to. We benefit greatly, but as a player, my mind goes to Kansas, and the reason was you always eat the same meal. And I don't know how they do this from a catering perspective, but the food is literally the exact same no matter where you go. And at least when I was playing, you'd have a lasagna option, you had steak, but in Kansas, the steak, understandably so, was elite. It was really good. I think I had like 3 or 4 steaks that night.
Just to confirm consistency?
And I was redshirting that year, so I didn't really have to worry. So I was just fueling the tank and knew I didn't have to run a bunch in the game on Saturday.
Coach Diaz would get after you, so the be ready mentality didn't necessarily apply to you.
I was ready. I was trying to build a little beef, figuratively and literally, so that I was ready the next year. Also a strong showing professionally. We went out there and did some hurting on a barbecue place. But I don't know. We made a trip out to Waco, Texas a couple years ago. To play Baylor. We went early because there's a hurricane coming and had some extra time. We made it down to Austin. I think we got a bucket of donuts.
You think?
If I remember correctly. That's a cool place being out in Texas. So that's probably my pick. Do you have any front runner?
You're a Midwestern guy. Or is that Midwestern?
Shockingly, I went by food,
Kansas
too.
And Dallas. No, I mean, I'm a big fan of Northwestern, and, Duke, Connecticut might as well have a little basketball crossover there. John Shire, the head coach of the men's basketball program, gave me an inside intel on a good place to grab a meal in Evanston, Northbrook, actually, his hometown. So, no, I like the trips to Northwestern. There have been some good games up there over the years. But we're looking forward to this weekend, Duke and Connecticut. We'll see you at 3:30 from East Hartford. CBS Sports Network has the television coverage, and we, of course, will have you guys covered on the radio. We'll see what Dave gets into the night before.
Yeah, I think we're going to find some hush puppies to silence the Huskies. How's that?
See you guys.